Welcome everyone to another session of Your Desk University. Today we have three special guests. They were part of the Dynamo redesign and they do UX at oh my goodness, I almost said Walter P. Moore. I am Tim and Hazel from Walter P. Moore. They're from Autodesk. They were a part of the Dynamo redesign and collectively, let me see if I get this right, they've worked on the generative design and Forma. They some have architectural backgrounds, others don't, as do most of you. They are UX designers, but one of them writes a lot of the content, and you've probably seen her training and documentation. So with that, I want to actually go straight to this. I'm excited to be learning about Figma alongside you today. And again, I've seen the people in the chat, so thank you. Definitely say hi. We're watching it, and we'll try to answer questions as they come in. But I want to introduce to you Elizabeth, Jingyi, and Helena. And Elizabeth is actually going to introduce their team to tell us a little bit more about who they are.
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to be here tonight. I'm Elizabeth. I've been an experienced designer at Autodesk since 2019, where I have worked on Dynamo and various generative design products and currently work on Revit. Previously to that, I was not in architecture. I have a background in enterprise software products, so across a lot of verticals. So it's been a really interesting journey. And Ginny?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jingyi. Really excited.
All right, just 1 second. We lost audio. All right, you're back.
Oh, thanks. I am a formal architect, but discover my passion in design digital experience. And next, Helena.
Hi, everyone. It's super exciting to be here tonight. My name is Helena, and I am a hybrid UX designer as well as content designer. So Timon mentioned that one of us does a lot of the writing and documentation. That's me. So I write help documentation, tutorials, blog posts, tooltips, things like that. I've been at Autodesk for 2 years now, so a little bit newer to the scene. Prior to that, I have nearly a decade of experience in actually online higher education, so a bit of a field changer here. Where I worked on various writing, editorial, and UX roles. I'm originally from Finland, currently residing in the beautiful state of New Hampshire.
And where are you guys all located? You're in New Hampshire.
I am in Florida.
Okay.
I'm in Boston.
And I'm in Washington, D.C., so we're able to do this kind of across the nation, which is
all
really
parts
cool.
of the East Coast.
Yeah, nice. So, Elizabeth, I think you're going to get started and share some of these tips. Now, I just want to talk to the chat here for a minute again. We're going to be talking about Figma, and we're going to be talking about shareables, I think, and we're going to be talking about prototyping inside of Figma. So if you have explored Figma and you want to know how to do a certain thing, this would be a great time to do that. Personally, I'm going to be learning alongside you. I've used Adobe XD a little bit for doing UI designs, but I'm looking forward to seeing the tips and things that we learned today about Figma. So Elizabeth, I think you're up whenever you want to get started.
Sure thing. Yeah, so I'm going to start with an overview of the Figma UI and just where you can start and what the benefits of it are in your app development process. So Figma is a web-based tool for design and prototyping with a low barrier to entry. Today, we're going to discuss how you can get up and running quickly in Figma. We'll be looking specifically at the free version, which gives you 3 Figma files, unlimited personal files, and unlimited collaborators. Organizational and pro licenses are also available to expand your feature set. So, how can Figma be useful to you while building your app? Unlike a lot of traditional desktop tools for web and app design, since Figma is available on the web, You can easily collaborate with anyone on almost any device. Prototyping in Figma is very helpful for getting feedback from users and stakeholders before coding a solution. It's also fairly simple to get started in, as we'll discuss later in this talk. And Figma designs are extensible. You can directly extract CSS, iOS, or Android code for any element in your mockups when you're ready to move to the next phase. The images here show some example mockups and prototype screens that we used for early iteration during the Dynamo project here at Autodesk. So we can start by walking through the important parts of the Figma UI. This may be familiar to you if you've used it before, but if you haven't, these parts are kind of key. And later in this presentation, you'll also learn more about some of the details you can access behind the Prototype tab. So first, we have the canvas. This is your creative space where you can sketch, add comments, and create all of your deliverables. You'll want to create a frame or artboard as a background for each screen you mock up, as shown in this clip. Later, when you create a prototype, these frames can be linked together to show workflows or to host interactions. Next, we have the Layers panel. The Layers panel is basically the organizational structure of your file. Here you can view frames, groups, and objects in your file. And you can also edit the Z order of your layers, rename elements, or toggle visibility on and off. Next to layers, you'll also see the Assets tab, where you can eventually create and access your own component library. The toolbar is where you can get really creative. Here you have options for creating freeform shapes, like the pen and pencil tools, making frames and slices for exporting your designs, and tools for shapes, view, text options, and even the comment mode, where you can view, respond, and resolve comments from reviewers or collaborators. After you've created some shapes or objects on the canvas, you'll use the Property panel to adjust the visual aspects of shapes and text. From font and color to alignment and shadows, this is where you'll add the character to your concept. Next, I'll hand it off to Helena to discuss how you can turn these basics into something interactive.
Thanks, Elizabeth. The biggest perk of prototyping in Figma is that you can create designs pretty quickly, so you can gather feedback before coding it, which saves you time and allows you to address issues preemptively. So in this next section, I'm going to go over a high-level case study on how we used an interactive Figma prototype to iterate on a new feature for Dynamo. Next slide, please. Any Dynamo users out there? Some of you may have used the Graph Node Manager in Dynamo, which you can see on the right side of the screen here. The Graph Node Manager was released in Dynamo Core 2.15 in July of last year, and it has also been available in Dynamo for Revit, starting with the 2023.1 release. The Graph Node Manager is a Dynamo extension to help users easily identify issues with the graph, search for nodes by name, manage their graph in a central location, and much more. So I'll be discussing how we use Figma to prototype, test, and iterate on this Graph Node Manager tool. Next slide,
And I'll say that
please.
anybody that's done much package management and node management, like they need that. And so I'm glad to see it's out. Sad that it's only in 2023, but I'm glad to see those kinds of changes are coming. So
Yeah, give it a try if you haven't already. So first, a little bit of background. We wanted to give Dynamo users an easy way to manage their graph, especially large graphs with dozens or hundreds of nodes can be really hard to navigate manually. Next slide, please. Prototyping can get very complex and highly realistic, but it doesn't have to. You can use simple shapes and colors to give your testers or stakeholders a general idea of how things work, while also communicating that things are still in progress, which will save you a ton of time if you're just exploring ideas. So in this case, We use these simple boxes to represent nodes. As you can see, it's not very true to life, but they work well to illustrate a concept. And while we are talking about Figma today, you actually don't need any technology to prototype. You can even hand draw your ideas on a piece of paper and show to your prospective user so they can give you feedback. Next slide, please. From there, you can increase the fidelity or the realism level until you get pretty close to your design, what it'll ultimately look like in the product. So I created these 4 options for how the Graph Node Manager could work at a high level. And once you get the hang of designing in Figma, it can be super tempting to jump straight into high fidelity prototyping, but to save time and effort, it's always a good idea to start low fidelity, get feedback, and then iterate over time. So one benefit to higher fidelity is that your users and stakeholders can better understand what's going on, and you don't have to explain so much in words or give caveats. So we posted these options to the Dynamo forum and let users vote on their favorite option. And the winner was the top left one. And on the Dynamo team, we love working with our users and gathering as much feedback as possible, since our users are who we are designing for. And again, a huge perk of Figma prototyping is that it allows you to gather the feedback and implement it in your design. Next slide, please. So the next step is adding interactions to your design. This is what makes it a prototype. In Figma, the foundation of prototyping is going into the prototype mode, which you can access on the right side of the screen in the prototype panel, and adding these connections between your frames. These interactions can be extremely simple, such as clicking on a screen to advance to the next screen, which is what I am prototyping here in this example. Next slide, please. Or it can involve complex animations and a ton of interconnections, resulting in Figma's own version of spaghetti code, but also more realistic and functional prototype. But regardless of complexity level, once you have a prototype, the next step is, once again, show it to your stakeholders and users. Next slide, please. Yep. In case of the Graph Node Manager, I asked both Dynamo users at Autodesk as well as external users to try out the prototype by sharing the link with them. I gave them some tasks to complete, trying to anticipate ways that users would use the tool in real life, and then I observed any difficulties they ran into, and I wrote down any suggestions that they made. So here on the screen, you can see an example of the interactive prototype in action. Notice that we are using a combination of those simple shapes as well as more accurate representations. Next slide, please. The key is really to identify themes. Are multiple users stumbling on the same thing? Are they asking about a feature that you didn't think of yet? This can help you identify issues to fix pre-launch. So, how did this prototyping help us improve the Graph Node Manager? Well, based on the users' comments and things that tripped them up in the testing, some of the changes that we made included, we added a blue dot to show renamed nodes. We made it more obvious when a node is inactive. We exposed the filters by default without having to first click search. We added Dynamo core or package information to each node in the list, and so much more. And that's the real strength of iterating on your designs using a prototype. You don't have to wait until post-launch to get all this feedback, so you can deliver a better experience for your users right out the gate. And that's it for our case study, and next I'll hand it off to Jingyi.
Thanks, Helena. So now you have a prototype in Figma. What's next? Figma makes it super easy to share. You can just click on this share button on the right and then manage access here. You may decide whether you want the viewer to also be able to edit or just check it out and leave some comments. Then you may share the link and people can open this prototype in their browser. Commenting is also easy by simply clicking on the icon on the on the left and then start typing. The owner of the Figma file will get notification for any comment. And once you're ready for implementation, you can extract code by selecting the object you would want and go to this Inspect tab on the right. You can get CSS, iOS, or Android code from here. You can also create presentations easily within Figma with the technique that Helena just showed. You can first frame your content and then set animations through the interaction tab. And it can have very similar transitions just as PPT or any other tools. You can also make animations just from prototyping in Figma. And there are numerous resources if you want to learn more, but here are two official ones from Figma. One is a YouTube channel, and the other one is Figma Learn Design, which also includes more topics on general prototyping techniques and design skills. And last but not least, if you would like to see more real example of how we prototype for Dynamo, visit the Dynamo forum, and you can also join the Autodesk research community where you can peek into ongoing projects and give us feedback. And of course, please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn.
Nice.
And that's everything we have.
Thank you. Thank you all for preparing that for us. I had a couple questions that came up. Wanted to throw them in as we were going, but I figured I'd hold off to the end. So you talk about low fidelity prototypes. And by the way, those on YouTube, I'm going to try to figure out how to navigate 4 people and a screen share. So I apologize for anything that comes up with that. But definitely throw your questions in. If you're enjoying this, you can really help us out by helping out YouTube and giving that like button. I feel silly to say it, but it really does actively help the channel. So low fidelity prototypes. You mentioned it, and I think most people think about it is I just want to code. I want to jump right in and do the full visual, right? I want the high fidelity aspect. Can you talk to people who may be speaking to a smaller team? So maybe they have, four people they're dealing with, maybe not 400 people that are providing back feedback. Can you just speak more of the value of the time spent in creating those low fidelity models and the benefits?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, low fidelity prototyping helps you get multiple different ideas out there much more quickly. If you're going to sit down and try to code each of those ideas from scratch, you're going to end up spending a lot more time than you would if you're just doing like I know we're talking about Figma again, but maybe just a paper sketch or, whatever is your drawing tool of choice. You could very quickly sketch some ideas, talk to your 4 or however many collaborators, get their feedback, get their thoughts, bounce ideas back and forth. And then once you decide on one, maybe develop that further by increasing the fidelity of your prototypes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think obviously not as a UX or UI designer, which maybe that's the next question is describe UI versus UX. I tend to think sometimes like, oh, I can't really get the impression across in the low fidelity. So I might as well just spend all the time doing the high fidelity. And then people look at it and they're like, this doesn't make sense. And I'm like, let me just throw something more high fidelity on there and hope that it works.
There's actually a theory around that design too, that the most detailed version that you show to your users, you're going to get all of the feedback on the highest level of detail. So if I really want to know if my concept is working for like a chat bot I'm creating, I might not want to show visual fidelity right away because you're going to get comments on the buttons and the font and the details. Whereas kind of scaling it down and starting your test with this is low fidelity, this is not the final version, how do you feel about this functionality? Can really get the feedback you need in those earlier phases.
I think it's interesting you mentioned a chatbot with regards to low fidelity because there was one released recently. I don't know which one we're talking about. That was made very public, and they chose a very minimalistic model even for what they released, and it's just interesting because then the focus becomes on the content and not necessarily the design decisions. Anyways, I know this is not what we're talking about, but that's what it made me think about. Mark's asking us, is there a large difference between the functionality in the the paid version and the free versions of Figma? And can you guys speak to that?
I can start. So I wouldn't say there's a large difference in functionality. The difference really comes into how large of projects you can have. and how many collaborators you can invite and how easily you can share things. So if you're working in a large organization on a lot of different concepts at once, it becomes worth it to have the paid version, one of them. Whereas if it's just you personally working on a personal project, free probably offers all of the design tools you need.
And you said there were 3 shared boards or an unlimited personal boards. Is that how I understood that?
Yes. So you have 3 that you can actually share a link to. And of course, it depends on since you're not an organization, I believe it'll depend on what the person you shared to, what their subscription is to Figma. They can just come with no subscription at all and still leave comments. So you have a few sharing options
Oh,
still.
okay. Well, I'm looking at Lebo here in the chat, and I'm going to say, Lebo, we need a Your Desk University Figma that can be shared across everyone. I don't know what we're going to design, but anyways, uh, Jingy, you talked about using it for slides, and I've actually seen the reverse done where people have used PowerPoint to prototype. Can you talk about the complexities that might come, or the ease and the beauty that comes from using the tools in reverse?
That's a very good question. I think one of the benefit of using Figma to do it is the interface is a lot more easier to navigate, and it's a lot more specialized in actually prototyping. Whereas for just making a slide, if you want to present your idea to someone, it doesn't have to have that much functionality in just purely about the presentation. Figma does have the very basic like transition, and you can make like animation for the slide, so you can all have your visual asset in the same place, and you don't need to do open any other software, and it's also like all saved in the same place, as it's easier to share to others and to kind of archive the data.
So you're saying
So I
that
think
if you were building a prototype in Figma, it might be a great place to do your demo, but you wouldn't recommend people are building full PowerPoint slides directly in Figma.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think if you are just sharing your idea, it's a really great way to do the slides through Figma. You just simply put things into frame and then create connection and do the transition. And it's really quick and easy, instead of like you have to find template in PowerPoint and then like added the different text or image out of the box and then import stuff into it. So it's a lot easier to just do a quick and easy presentation. And also, as we talk about focus, like that focus more on the content of the slides rather than any like fancy transition or fancy visual style or things like that.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat, which I'll let you guys decide, your team decide who wants to take it. But actually, something I was thinking coming into today is, can you talk about organizing components and design systems? Again, I haven't used Figma. I know in Adobe XD some of this, but it's something I definitely want to understand. Yeah, and I'm sure there's other questions that we can tear off into that. You're welcome to share like a live Figma if you're able to do that, or just talk to it.
I can start. I think about design component and design system. We actually have within Autodesk, we have our own component library and design system, which unfortunately we can't really do a live demo to you all because confidentiality. But basically, there are separate teams that manage it, and then within Figma, you can, when you want to add any component or things, you can browse through the asset, which is basically looking at the library from your company or anything that's available. There's also like community library too that you can leverage through there. So we don't really maintain ourselves, don't really maintain any library, but there's a lot. It's pretty easy to navigate through all the available assets and library there.
Yeah, do y'all have any tips for, a 1-person team or a 3-person team, and how to create components or how to organize their libraries if you were advising somebody in that kind of situation?
I think the nice thing about components is that it can be as lightweight as you want it to be. So you can literally select a group that you're happy with that you think makes a good
Mm-hmm.
component and turn it into a component. And then you'll have it. And if you look at your assets library, you'll be able to see that there. You can share it across projects if you choose to. And you can drag that over and over. So it can really speed up things. Like in one of my examples, I'm
Mm-hmm.
making a text field. And in a large workflow, you would definitely want to just make that a component that
Mm-hmm.
you drag and drop repeatedly. And you don't really have to worry about making specific libraries if you're working on a smaller project and it's just you. But there's a lot of easy ways to reuse data without remaking everything.
And I imagine since coming back to the high and low fidelity question, I imagine you probably have both. You have like components that are low and components that are high fidelity. Do they convert? Do they transform somehow?
They don't transform, no.
You have to replace. You have to rebuild the whole everything at the higher fidelity.
Well, the nice thing is when you have a large set,
Mm-hmm.
like Jenny mentioned, our large design library at Autodesk, we do have the features where if we have added something that's not quite what we want, we can replace the component and just search for a different component. So we
Mm,
could go through and
pretty quickly and
upgrade
replace
it,
them all. Yeah,
if
that's
you
great.
will. Yeah.
What about Figma versus Canva? Has anybody used Canva? It's one of the questions in the chat, comparing the two.
I think I used Canva once years ago, and I remember it being like a combination, and I might be really off base, but I just remember it being a combination of kind of PowerPoint and Pinterest. So I would say I don't know anyone who uses Canva as a web design or UX design tool, but I know a lot of people that use it for general kind of
Like
graphic,
theming. It sounds a little bit like
yeah,
mural.
designs for mood boards, for stuff like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, that's just my understanding though, so I'm not super familiar with Canva.
All
Maybe
right.
one of
Yeah,
you.
other people are saying the Canva's not collaborative, but they're using it for some of the some things. Yeah. Did anybody else want to answer that? Okay. Oh, yeah.
I could weigh in a little bit. I think we chatted a bit about using PowerPoint, or perhaps Canva. I also haven't heard of that really being used for things like prototyping. The nice thing about Figma is that it is a specialized tool specifically for prototyping and making these designs. And in my opinion, it's also quite user friendly. I
Mm-hmm,
think the barrier to entry is pretty low.
mm-hmm,
When it comes down to it, the basic tools are super simple. You can just
mm-hmm,
start drawing rectangles and text box and changing colors, things like that. So it's pretty easy to get started. That being said, it doesn't have those like built-in templates like a PowerPoint or a Canva might have.
mm-hmm.
But again, if you're looking to create UX designs and or interactive prototypes, I think Figma is the go-to tool.
Yeah, Figma's pretty powerful in that way.
Yeah.
AI, there's so many conversations right now about auto-generated this and auto-generated that. What kind of tools have you explored? Maybe used, maybe not used, but find kind of potentially relevant to people who are building things in Figma?
I can start.
Go for it.
This is super interesting because I don't know of any software companies right now that are really allowing the use of any of these
Mm,
tools to design their products because of customer data and all sorts of confidentiality issues. In my mind, I have, in my personal time, played around with some of the tools out there, and I think they're great for really simple things, but not a replacement for more in-depth design. So they can be really great for generating a documentation style for your Figma,
mm,
for documenting a design system. They can be really good for coming up with a basic color scheme. Like I've had great luck doing things like give me something that is soothing and aquatic, and I get a great color scheme. And in my test, it kind of falls apart when I get more specific, like give me a stock tracking app screen and things start to go haywire. So I don't think it's quite there yet to be super useful in the visual
Give
design.
me an upgraded Dynamo screen, and it's like,
Yeah,
I'm not
it's
trained on upgraded Dynamo screens. But I actually thought, and I'm curious to hear Helena and Jingy your answers. I actually the reason I phrased the question that way is, I made the assumption that, you know, lots of companies want to be very careful about how AI generated things are influencing kind of the work that they're doing. But there is a lot of interesting things. And I think one of the things I have noticed is the first round of sharing. And you might notice this. And by the way, I'm speaking to you first, YouTube, all of our audience. But you've noticed this series is avoiding ML almost completely. And the reason is because I feel like it's so like permeated as a buzzword right now, and everyone's sharing about how like, oh my goodness, look, I just designed in an this, or I did all of this, and all I did was type this, and this everything was finished. And when you dig into it, sometimes at the depths, even one layer deep, you lose a lot. And we see a lot of that happening in the posts. And so I would say, be really cautious for those who are using AI ML. I will say, I'm going to name it, I think, ChatGPT. I've accessed it a lot to like try something or rephrase something. But then really cautiously thinking about what it's providing back. So yeah, but I've seen the same thing for user. Again, back to the UI UX question, user interfaces. I see people, hey, I sketched this general user interface, and the entire website was fully created and fully connected, and it's like, is that surface? Is that like real? Maybe you can answer collectively those kinds of thoughts or questions. Helena, you're smiling. So
oh yeah, this is such a fun topic, and I'm thinking of a specific experience I had with ChatGPT in particular. And just jumping a little bit, as I mentioned at the beginning, I write. I'm a writer. I do documentation, things like that. So of course I'm interested in ChatGPT, right? One of the biggest limitations that I'm sure everyone's aware of is its knowledge ends in 2021. So if you're trying to discuss anything newer than that with it, it's just not going. It's going to confidently be wrong. It's going to give you an answer, but it's not going to be right. But yeah, certainly I've experimented with ChatGPT, and I did an experiment very early on. I asked ChatGPT to describe Dynamo. I was curious if it would be different from how we describe Dynamo.
It has yellow nodes, it said. Sorry.
So I don't think it went that granular, but it gave me a little blurb, and I asked it to make it more fun. Describe Dynamo, make it more fun. And it told me that apparently you can use Dynamo to order a pizza, which to me was surprising. Not exactly the most salient selling point for Dynamo, but an interesting thing that I learned that day. So what's that, Elizabeth?
It would be great.
Right? Yeah, I could certainly use one right about now. But I guess long story short is it's a fun tool to play around with at this point. Remains to be seen though, the application in the future.
The pizza story is interesting. I don't know if you know, but there are multiple Revit add-ins, and I think Dynamo scripts that have actually been ordered to order pizza.
Yes.
So it's kind of hilarious that ChatGPT found and posted about that, because that is kind of like one of the jokes that goes around the computational design community.
That's funny.
How can you order a pizza? Because there's APIs to order a pizza.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think one of the people in the chat right here built one of those, but I'm not going to call them out because I'm probably wrong. So what about those like draw, stencil, generate a user experience, user interface?
I've actually tried a couple ones about like specifically in like saying that they can create good graphic and visual. And I think I can see them as a good way for inspiration. Like Elizabeth said, it can get like color scheme and things like that. You can just get maybe some basic idea from them, but all the design that's generated are not really in depth. And it may look pretty, but the interaction and everything can't really, if you look at it closely, it doesn't make sense. So it's really just focusing. It's kind of back to our UI or UX question. It's more focusing on the visual, which doesn't really make sense. It's just purely visual, putting together color, putting together pretty text, and things like that. It doesn't really understand any functionality or doesn't understand anything that how like a human use it. that's a fundamental difference of how like we as human like do this kind of UX design versus the so-called like generating design tool powered
Hmm.
by AI.
Yeah. What's been one of your favorite for each of you? What's been one of your favorite? Let me just check. Yeah, what's been one of your favorite things to build that you've been able to release and you can actually talk about at Autodesk? We'll keep it. We'll keep the bucket small.
I can talk about it. Something that I loved the Dynamo project, and that is right up there just because it was so great to work with such an engaged community of users. And it was a little different from the process of working on a lot of Autodesk products.
Hmm.
But recently, I've worked on some analysis tools that I thought were really cool. And you can see those in the newly launched Forma. So that was a really fun project to kind of get an idea of a whole new industry and some of the
Hmm.
environmental aspects of different phases of building design. Um, and that's probably one of my favorites
Yeah.
recently.
So speaking of Forma, that was a totally new space to jump into and learn. And I know as a UX designer, you have to jump into new things very quickly. How have you adapted over during your education or over your careers to jump in, learn something quickly, provide value, and then in a sense jump out?
Yeah, interesting question. I come from a background of just being a software designer. So I've worked across a lot of different industries like finance, CRM, all sorts of stuff. And it's kind of become second nature to me. Since being at Autodesk, this is probably the longest I've spent in one industry, kind of moving between similar user
Hmm.
groups. Typically, I'm used to starting a project with some very specific questions about the user base, about any past performance, feedback channels, and doing my own quick research of the market we're targeting. So I have a few ways that I typically jump right in and I find that the best thing to do is try to make an educated guess of what's a helpful design, and then you have something to discuss with the team right
Hmm.
away.
Cool. So, what's another Jingy? What's something you've been able to build that you're really proud of?
I would say the actually kind of related to AI, like we have a machine learning powered node autocomplete that was just released early this year with Revit 2024 and Dynamo 2.17. And we've been working on this for a long time. And the idea is really trying to help, especially like beginner users to understand how Dynamo
Hmm.
work and build their graph easily and just trying to lower the entry barrier for our users. And we are really excited about it as like it's the benefit of machine learning is it's kind of like a collaborative effort that we collect all the knowledge from our great community and our Dynamo team and then train the model so we can recommend the node. So this is something that we are really excited also to see you all give it a try and give us feedback. And this is really our first version of this, just a beginning. So we are working on making it even better. So excited to see how you all think about it, and please give us feedback if you like.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty cool feature. I think I first saw was there a package called Dino that did something like that that like kind of predictive kind of gave you potentially another node coming in. But I think that idea, especially for learning and getting started with things for a new person, like this is kind of what people usually attach after this. This is what people kind of usually attach after before this. You're not telling people how to design, but you're helping people get to there easier. So that's really I'm excited to have people experiment that and see how it turns out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Helena, what's something you're proud of?
Yeah, so I chose the Graph Node Manager as an example for a reason. I think it's a super practical tool. So again, if you haven't tried it yet, Dynamo users, give it a whirl. Let us know what you think. And the other one I'd like to mention, just because we already looked at the Graph Node Manager, is I was able to contribute some improvements to our documentation browser. So again, if you're not familiar with that one, in Dynamo, select a node and press F1, and the documentation browser will open. So we added some nifty new features into that. More recently, too, you're able to now add an example graph directly from the documentation browser when you're looking at node help. So this can be super, super helpful because you'll be able to see an actual example of the node in question being used in a graph context, and you can look at the inputs and outputs. So I think that will be super, super helpful, again, for new users, but really for all users. We're looking to learn more about nodes. Also, we're always working on exciting new stuff. Please continue looking at the forum if you're in there, and join our research community. Just had to give it one more plug for that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the things that's really helpful, especially when you're building new things, is getting feedback from users. So I can totally understand why that is. I am going to say thank you. I'm going to cut it here. I think it's been a great conversation. But I definitely, like, I appreciate one of the things about this team. I asked them to put together a fire hose presentation that we could kind of have some conversation afterwards. And I know that you, as the user, as the YouTube viewers, that's what you really want. You want out of this is a little nugget, and then some conversation. So huge thanks to your team for putting that together. And yeah, the next 2 weeks, let me see here. The next 2 weeks, there's actually going to be 2 double headers. So we're going to have a 1 o'clock and a 6 o'clock show the next 2 weeks, as we prepare to close out this series about the web for architects. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you there or in the chat. You can always find me in Discord, you can always find me in Discord, LinkedIn, and Twitter. I'm happy to answer questions and engage with other speakers. And I think maybe I hinted to the fact that the next series, we're probably going to focus on AI, ML, and big data. So stay tuned, subscribe so that you can get those notifications. And like I said before, if you don't mind hitting that like button, if you got any value out of this, it would be great and beneficial to the channel. So thank you so much, and we will see you later once I can figure out how to stop this thing.